Good afternoon, welcome to this accountability and performance meeting. I'm Jonathan Shepherd, Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Andy Prophet, the Chief Constable of Hertfordshire Constabulary. These meetings are designed to help me fulfil my statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the work of Hertfordshire Constabulary, and they are live streamed to the public for transparency. They are on view-only mode, so there's no ability for the public to ask questions, but I hope you'll find it interesting and informative nonetheless. We've got a number of items on the agenda today, which we'll go through in this order. Firstly, we'll be looking at knife crime, then county lines, the serious violence duty, fraud and scams, and Operation Hotspot. So we'll start with knife crime then, and perhaps, Chief Constable, I could just ask you for an update on trends in crime data and outcomes relating to knife crime and weapons possession offences. Of course, it's an important month at the moment for Hertfordshire, having the Knife Angel in the county, and so a lot of activity and focus across the board on this subject this month.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon. And of course, this is a hugely important area for us to get right in the constabulary and in our work actually with partners and communities. I suppose the headline is Hertfordshire is a safe county. And I say that not from a position of complacency in any way, shape or form, but recorded knife crime is falling in the county. Since January, we've recorded 1,469 offences where there was a link to a knife. Now, it's really important to contextualise that. There are, within that, the largest group is where we found people in possession of a knife, and we actively go out tactically into crime hotspots, target criminal gangs, looking for people with a knife. So some of that is a symptom and a sign of good proactive policing. So that's the largest category. Within that, followed by incidents where no violence, where no injury was caused. We understand what that looks like across the county. There's a fairly even spread around the county, but the highest prevalence, I use that phrase cautiously, is in Watford and Hatfield. There are two warmer spots in relation to possession and knife violence. As I say, we're incredibly proactive around this. So for the same period, there were 778 stop searches where weapons were specifically the subject of that activity. And there was a 28%, so almost a 3 in 10 positive outcome rate of those stop searches targeting weapons. So we're really proactive and effective at targeting it. We understand who the individuals are who habitually carry knives. There's a crime and intelligence picture, and we work really carefully with our local partners, for example, children's social care, adult social care, health, to make sure we've got a wrap around those individuals, either to support them away from that risky behaviour or to indeed enforce the law and hold them to account. And we don't just rely on police data, some of which I've just quoted to you. We look at A&E hospital admission data as well, because we realise that sometimes offences aren't reported to the police. So we get as full a possible understanding. So stepping back from it, the level of incidents of knives being reported is going down. We're not at all underestimating the importance of it, and we're really proactive at targeting places and individuals where we believe knives are involved.
Thank you for that update, and I think positive to hear in terms of reductions, but actually more being generated through proactive activity, because those offences are there, but there's no difference at the end of them in terms of how the knife offence might have affected other people. So that's a positive direction of travel to hear. You touched a little bit around kind of known individuals. Can you touch a bit more then around how the constabulary approaches kind of habitual knife carriers and that really persistent cohort of people, and particularly thinking about younger people as well, how that work from a kind of intervention prevention approach happens?
So this is a really, really important area for us. It's a really good indicator of risk where you know you've got children and young people involved in criminality, gangs, or carriage of knives. So one of the things we do is we identify a group of individuals who we call habitual knife carriers. And that is effectively where we have crime information or intelligence of 3 or more occasions in a 12-month period connecting that individual to that type of behaviour. and we are currently actively working with 39 people, 21 of whom are children and 18 of whom are adults, to divert, hopefully, them away from that behaviour. So that involves a coordinated partnership meeting with a senior officer, working with children's services, working with adult services, working with health services to provide the right intervention, diversion, education for those individuals. And where that doesn't work, for whatever reason, or the individual doesn't engage, we move on then to enforcement phase, where we hold them to account for the criminality that's involved. So that is a well-tried and tested, evidence-based partnership approach to dealing with individuals who exhibit that intelligence or that risky behaviour. And there's really good evidence to show that across that cohort over time, almost half of those individuals, when we engage with them, don't go on to commit more crime. So it works.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question in terms of the impact of it. So about
41% is the precise number that I've got.
So really significant numbers being diverted away, and then others through the criminal justice system as a break. And in terms of the sort of proactive work to reduce the number of knives and weapons in the county, you've touched a bit around the kind of proactive policing element of that in terms of stop search and things. Kind of more broadly, what does the constabulary do with partners to just get knives and weapons out of circulation generally?
So we do an awful lot. I mean, it goes without saying, we work really closely with schools, colleges, universities around the prevention and education and awareness. Don't carry knives, it won't keep you safe, it is dangerous, it is a crime. So we really work hard, and that's from almost primary school children all the way through, because we know get that messaging in early. We work with our partners in town centres and hotspot areas to get the visibility right. And actually, around the constabulary, there's lots of knife bins, which, for members of the public who haven't seen them, effectively, it's like an amnesty. You can drop weapons off at the bins safely, without any kind of fear of comeback or any sanction. So it's a really safe way and a proactive way for the policing to get knives off the streets. We have a number of campaigns that are run in relation to that, and on occasions hundreds of knives get dropped off. Which is just a fantastic thing to do. Pleasingly, and you can see this either way, the last proactive campaign we did was in relation to larger zombie knives and swords, and we pushed this really hard. And on previous campaigns around normal knives, we had lots of knives dropped off, but no swords or zombie knives have dropped off. Now, I can see that both ways. Number one, that could be an indication of there isn't a prevalence of that type of weapon in the county. I also recognise there could be an indication that those knives, those weapons haven't been handed in. But we will continue to be really proactive, not just enforcing the law and doing hard policing, but working with our partners and doing the prevention, diversion, and making the ability to hand in knives where appropriate possible as well.
Thank you. And I know that the police cadets also do some work with officers around sort of test purchasing, making sure that young people shouldn't be purchasing in the first place. I know there's been some activity this month around that as well, which is good. Thinking then about the county hosting the Knife Angel this month in Welwyn Garden City, I know there's a lot of work being done through the constabulary, through my office, the Borough Council and other partners on this. Can you just take through, for the benefit of the public, some of the work that's being done to kind of make the most of that being a focal point in the county this month?
Of course. So the Knife Angel, for those that are listening and don't know, is effectively a statue made of recovered knives. The Knife Angel is a 20-30 foot tall monument that currently is in Welwyn Garden City for the month of October. And the whole idea behind this is awareness raising of the danger of carrying knives. And it's a way for police and partners and communities to come together and have a conversation about how we prevent the awful things that can happen when knives are carried out and are used for criminal purposes. So we've been doing a huge amount from a launch event where we had hundreds of people there, from across education, policing, councils, third-party providers and others. There's been community radio broadcasts. We've been doing some work with Watford and Stevenage Football Club around diversion away from from being on street corners, carrying knives through sports and engagement. So just a huge programme of work across the county to really highlight how we want to stamp out the carriage of knives and knife-based violence. Alongside that, at the same time, the Constabulary's been doing a range of additional investigative work, overt and covert, because it's the prevention bit, that's the Knife Angel, alongside the hard-edge policing enforcement, which is vital as well. Why do we do this? Because knives take lives, and it's critical to keep that conversation going with communities.
Thank you. And we know kind of nationally the peak age for carrying a knife is about 15. And so that kind of real impact in terms of the safety of young people is really, really critical. And I think really positive that Knife Angel's in the county for the first time. So the opening event was really well received, which is good to hear. The work that's being done through the month. I suppose one of the kind of overarching strategic points on this is the government set a target to halve knife crime over the course of a decade. That's a big ask for policing and other partners. What more do you think is going to be needed from a policing point of view over a long time range to try and achieve that target?
I think there's lots of things there. You and I will, I know, continue collaboratively to have the conversation around how we get the right funding settlement for policing in Hertfordshire, because with more officers doing more hotspot work, doing more specialist investigations, I can dismantle more county lines, take more weapons off the street, and take away some of the criminal organisation that drives some of this behaviour. We can get potentially closer work with schools around that early prevention, diversion, and awareness. I think that there's something about resourcing that can do in that space. I also think there's something about just the general awareness across communities, parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, schools, and how we make sure that everyone is that kind of potential set of eyes that can raise a risk or flag a concern. I think probably the third thing I would say is that how we get into a community, for example, Hemel Hempstead or Watford or Stevenage or wherever it might be, and actually get into communities in estates where problems are happening. We've been doing this over the last year, as you know. It's a national programme called Clear, Hold and Build. And police do lots of activity to enforce the law, take out criminal gangs, raid people's houses. Then a range of partners come together to hold, to clean up, to tidy up, to improve lighting, to remove graffiti, to make places feel safer, so then communities can build together in a better way. So I think some of that really strategic joined up work, making communities safer themselves, is part of the strategy we need to push forward.
Thank you, and I certainly concur with those points. Thank you. That probably leads us on nicely to the second agenda item around county lines, and very much kind of links to some of that very neighbourhood level approaches as well. What's the current assessment of the Constabulary of the scale of county lines in Hertfordshire, and how's it being addressed?
Thank you. So a county line, for the benefit of any doubt, is a business model around drug dealing gangs selling drugs through a phone number, hence the phrase county line. Our current assessment in the Constabulary as of this morning is there are 19 active county lines we know about, and we are doing activity on in a range of different forms. I have a dedicated county lines team, for want of a better phrase, whose sole job it is to gather information and, working with the rest of the Constabulary, enforce activity against those county lines. We are very good and very successful at this. So since January, we have dismantled 51 county lines. Unfortunately, the reality is they pop and can crop back up again. But we've taken out 51 phones and the criminal networks around them. That has delivered 81 arrests, taken drugs off the streets of Hertfordshire to a value of approaching £250,000, resulted in criminal cash seizures of over £50,000, 12 either real or imitation firearms taken off the streets, 37 bladed weapons taken off the streets, and 20 individuals who were at extreme risk around their vulnerability, specifically safeguarded around their vulnerability in relation to that. So my assessment is we haven't cracked this problem. It does drive crime and harm in the county. Things like theft in our high streets, shoplifting, vehicle crime, house burglary are driven by drug addiction. And drug addiction is fed by criminal gangs providing drugs on the streets of Hertfordshire. We have a really strong approach to it. We will continue to have a strong approach to it. We need to keep looking for, and I am, the capacity in the system to do even more.
Thank you. And that is a significant number in terms of those dismantled over the course of just this year. And as you say, sadly, they'll get replaced in places. But reassuring to hear the work that's going on and the success of that dedicated team. There's quite a bit of evidence nationally that the kind of business model that you rightly referred to it as has got more localised, and that the kind of model of gangs kind of putting people on a train or on a transport network to go from cities into towns is actually getting much more locally focused. How's the constabulary taking account of that in its approach to it being kind of a more contained problem in Hertfordshire, if that's the right expression?
Yeah, I think that's entirely right. So I think the first thing to say is first of all, we are aware of that. We sit as the constabulary on the a national working group that looks at national trends and patterns, and that theme of things becoming more localised is really clear. To address that, we've put 2 additional dedicated detectives in effectively our intelligence team to understand what that looks like locally. So what is the problem profile for Welwyn Garden City? What is the problem profile for all the different communities around Hertfordshire, so we can understand and respond to that effectively? We have also, I think, as I mentioned last time, just literally reviewed the kind of the local neighbourhood policing crime fighting model. So I've invested more capability and senior leadership in our local districts, including senior detectives, to really understand crime trends, including this horrible crime. So we are, my ambition is more effective and more proactive at understanding, quickly responding to and tackling crime trends. Because this crime, not only does it cause immense harm, it drives other crime in our communities. And that's exactly why we're investing in the neighbourhood policing, so we can be all over it.
Thank you. And how, as part of that kind of national coordination that you referred to, kind of there are some funding streams attached to that. I think I'm right in saying, kind of how does that support the work of that team and the ability of the constabulary to kind of act in this space?
Well, first and foremost, we do make use of that national funding stream. It drives some of our intelligence gathering and our enforcement activities, informed by national agencies and informed by those kind of those national bodies. And through that additional investment, we get not just hotspot policing, but other policing. We can do more intensification. So 3 times a year at least, we put on specific intensified activity to absolutely kind of push it forward at another level, so we get right into this type of crime.
Thank you. And how does that kind of join up with other police forces, particularly thinking about British Transport Police in terms of those relationships? Certainly when I've seen some of the work of that team before, kind of operation they were doing that started in Hertfordshire, actually the raid they were doing was in another county. So how's that coordinated with neighbouring forces and BTP?
That's right. So we have a regular tasking and coordination meeting, not just about crime in general, but about this type of crime and criminality. As you rightly say, we work really closely with the British Transport Police, because quite often individuals move around on the train lines into and out of Hertfordshire, not just from London, that's fairly significantly, but from all around the map. We work incredibly closely with all our neighbouring forces, Thames Valley, Cambridge and Bedfordshire, into Essex, to understand how those patterns move. And indeed we work with those forces where those gangs work across, as they often do, work across county boundaries. So there is a really strong coordination in that space.
a bit around the kind of safeguarding impact of these offences and individuals sometimes being exploited through county lines. You see a strong link around young people going missing, cuckooing kind of vulnerabilities around adults. How does the constabulary seek to identify and safeguard those being exploited through county lines?
Well, it's a really proactive area of work for not just our county lines team, but we have specialist teams that look at cuckooing and exploitation of children and vulnerable adults. One of the very specific things we seek to gather information on around vulnerable premises: who's there, who might have had their house taken over, who might be therefore a victim of the criminal exploitation. And we not only gather that information, we then work with our partners around it. So all those agencies I referred to: children's social care, adult social care, mental health, education, to make sure where we identify individuals at risk, where necessary we'll treat them as a victim, not a suspect. We'll seek to get them out of that situation in a safe way, so then we can target on the criminals who've been exploiting them. So this is probably quite a big kind of sophistication and evolution of our approach over the last 4 or 5 years, where we understand that not every individual in a drug dealing house is purely a criminal kind of criminally motivated. They may be being victimised and exploited to do so. So we really do an awful lot of work in that space.
Thank you. And there's a kind of upcoming shift around cuckooing, given the intention to make that a specific criminal offence in legislation that's going through Parliament at the moment, that will kind of shift that kind of from just being a kind of safeguarding issue with some criminal aspects to being kind of specific criminal offence of taking over someone's property and exploiting it. How's the constabulary sort of preparing to operationalise that as a new offence when it comes in?
So we know the legislation's coming in. The kind of crime command that oversees the county lines team, making sure that individuals are trained and aware. We're making sure that we've got the right systems and processes to work with our partners where we need to take a different and more sophisticated approach. And indeed, we will be having conversations with the Crown Prosecution Service and vice versa about how we approach those investigations where that complexity exists. So, as with all new legislation, knowledge, training, and then working through how you're going to make it work for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that update, and welcome the progress that's being made through this year and beyond on that, because there's a real impact there in terms of the amount of drugs described being taken off the streets of Hertfordshire and all of the associated kind of violence and vulnerability that sometimes sits with that. So thank you for that update. I'm going to move on to another linked issue, which is the serious violence duty. So this is a statutory duty that's been in place for a number of years now on policing and other agencies, local authorities, health and others, to work together to plan for the prevention and reduction of serious violence in a locality. Could you set out for me how the constabulary works both individually and with the other duty holders to do that as the legislation requires? You've touched obviously in parts in some of the things we've looked at so far, but kind of broadly in terms of that serious violence duty, how does the constabulary approach that?
So the constabulary sits on a number of key partnership boards. So, for example, there's a criminal justice board where we sit down with the court system, the probation system, children, adult social care, the Crown Prosecution Service, to understand how we work together to support people through the criminal justice process, victims and indeed take offenders through. We sit on local community safety partnerships, children's safeguarding boards, adult safeguarding boards, and across that conversation around the duty, not just on the police but on other agencies, local authorities, health, the statutory providers, to prevent serious violence is a really key conversation. So only through working together, sharing information, understanding where there's shared risk and shared insight, will we understand some of this. So, for example, some examples, getting, which we do, A&E admission data to create our intelligence picture around where there may be harm happening that wasn't reported to the police, so we understand that. Where maybe that schools are having disclosures around harm that's happening to children that we don't understand, so we understand that potentially from a domestic abuse or a child abuse process. So to joining up all those partnership conversations through the serious violence duty and holding each other supportively to account, I think is important. Specifically in relation to violence, there's a serious violence strategy that runs across the county where key stakeholders that I've alluded to come together and seek to kind of map and draw these areas together. So not just for knives, not just for county lines, we look at it for domestic abuse, we look at it for homicide prevention where serious assaults take place. So there's not perfect, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but there's a really increasingly mature conversation about how we work together to stop serious harm.
Thank you. And kind of that kind of partnership working and data sharing that you've described is key in terms of kind of understanding the causes of serious violence in the county. Given it will kind of ebb and flow as society changes, how does the constabulary kind of keep that assessment kind of refined and up to date in terms of the things that are driving serious violence, albeit low in Hertfordshire?
So through continuous assessment of what is happening and what we need to do. So there is a county, as I said, there is a county serious violence strategy, and there is a regular assessment of what is happening and how we need to work together to respond to that. That then feeds into in the police my monthly tasking and coordination meeting, so I can make sure I'm doing my bits in the places or in relation to the people or the families that need that support. The constabulary has also developed a serious violence dashboard, so that's effectively a live performance measurement tool that shows me where and who needs to be targeted. So that kind of, increasingly I hope that shared mapping and that kind of hotspot focus is understood across partners, so we can all see where we need to be focused. And I've said a number of times we're being really proactive with sharing information with education, hospitals and others, because I think it's through doing and checking and making sure it's in your daily, weekly, monthly conversations that you get into this stuff.
Thank you. And how does the constabulary, and perhaps as part of the wider partnership, monitor the impact of this work? Because kind of almost by definition, that's hard in terms of how can you? Yes, you can understand the kind of the operational activity, but in terms of how do we reduce the level of violence generally in a county? How does the constabulary seek to ensure that the resources and the activity you put into it are having an overall kind of serious and sustained reducing effect?
Well, I love a spreadsheet. And I think there is something seriously about really knowing your business and tracking what's happening. So every single day, every single week, looking at trends, every single month, looking at month and 12-month trends. What's happening? Where's it happening? What type of crime? What type of harm? And responding to it really quickly. Now that's not a short-term tactical response in a negative way. That's really, really important. What happened last night and what we need to do today as a result of it against our strategic ambitions longer term. So I think that's really important. Know the data. Have really, really mature, not just monthly partnership meetings, but relationships where I can pick up the phone to a chief executive, you can pick up the phone to the chief executive at a hospital. So we've got an issue here that's bubbling up. What's your understanding? So I think that really fleet of foot approach. So we're incredibly proactive. It is the only way actually to tackle some of this. We can only work on the information we've got, but we know, we want it to come down. Communities want it to come down. The government ambition is to come down. We'll measure it and let's drive it down. That I think is what we have to do. So we have that information and it's trending in the right direction.
Thank you very much. And important to always say that Hertfordshire is a low violence county, but mustn't be complacent about it, and more can be can be done. So thank you. I want to then turn to our next agenda item, which is one we haven't touched on before, but is a really significant area of crime. Nationally, almost 40% of crime, and an area that's going to be kind of more prominent in future inspections that the police inspectorate undertake, which is around fraud, scams, and associated offences. It's estimated to cost the UK over £1 billion a year, and the kind of real effects of that to victims of crime in Hertfordshire. What's the Constabulary's current assessment of the risk to local residents from fraud, scams, cybercrime, those kinds of issues?
Thank you. This is another really important area. Affects too many people, and it doesn't just affect the elderly and the vulnerable, although that clearly is an area of concern. So the Constabulary categorises fraud in line with the national categories, which effectively, putting it simply, is courier fraud, to use the national phrase, which is where someone purports to be the police or the bank and defrauds you. Dating fraud, so kind of romance fraud that are connected with a relationship. Someone pretends to be in a relationship with you, but actually they're just after your cash. Investment fraud, send me £10,000, I'll send you £20,000 tomorrow type scam, so that investment fraud. And finally, the kind of what's called mandate fraud, pretending to be someone you're not. Those are the four national categories, and Hertfordshire works in that against those criteria. Well, how much is happening? And it's important to say here, there's a national agency called Action Fraud who takes receipt and filters and deals with some of this. And where there's key lines of inquiry, it comes to the Constabulary to pick up. So the numbers I'm about to tell you is what comes to the Constabulary to pick up. So I've got three years worth of data here, the whole of 2023, 2024 and 2025. If you look at courier fraud, the first one I told you about, the number of offences has fallen from 60 to 41 in 2023 to 2025. But the value of those frauds has been increasing. The value has been increasing, and that's a consistent theme across all of these. The number that is being referred through to us is decreasing, but the value is increasing. Dating fraud, there were 139 in 2023, and that reduced to 121 in 2025. Investment fraud was 332 in 2023, reducing to 269 so far in 2025. And mandate fraud, pretending to be someone you're not, was 64 in 2023 and 23 so far in 2025. Lots of numbers here. Behind all of those is a victim, and it's a horrible, nasty, horrible crime. Hertfordshire's good at investigating this. Of the investigations we get, we have a specialist fraud investigation team, and I'm looking to move all these investigations to that team in the coming weeks and months. They solve nearly 1 in 4 of them. I'd love it to be 1 in 2. I'd love it to be 100%, but there's a good track record in this, and I want all these investigations moving to that really capable team. We weren't complacent, and we asked the City of London, who are the lead national agency for fraud, to come into the organisation a little while ago and said, just tell us how we're doing. And they said our approaches, our understanding, the investigative capabilities we've got in that team are really strong. And that's why we're really pleased and going to be shifting all those investigations into that team with an investment alongside. So not complacent, but that's what we're doing and what the scale of the problem looks like.
And so where would those investigations have sat or be sitting at the moment before they go into that team?
So they'll probably sit in a local CID team who are great teams, but they'll be dealing with burglary and robbery and other serious violence. They may be sat with a neighbourhood crime team who we need in our town centres dealing with shop theft and other stuff. So creating a slightly bigger specialist team who know everything there is to know about fraud and supporting victims of fraud is the strategy that we're following.
Yeah, thank you. That makes perfect sense. You talked a little bit there around the sort of national structures for fraud. See, Action Fraud being a kind of reporting function, constabulary doing some of that investigation work, but also roles for the City of London and NCA, I think, as well, in terms of it. In terms of this isn't something the constabulary can do anything about, but there's often a perception from victims of crime that you kind of report into action fraud and then nothing really kind of comes of it. How does the constabulary work within that? Fraud is one of those things that doesn't sit within police force boundaries. It's a relatively complicated kind of national model. How does the constabulary work to ensure that victims get a good service wherever possible?
Well, first and foremost, you're right. Action fraud is the point of contact for a victim of fraud, and then we work really closely with action fraud. But actually, we take from action fraud what they give to us, and then do our very best job with those victims who've been referred to us. I don't think we are particularly proactive going to action fraud. You say, have you sure you've not got more you should send us? Because we trust the judgment of that agency to give us what we can meaningfully do to investigate and seek to solve. So that if you like, is the filter. So it's a really strong partnership, but we pick up what we're given by action fraud.
And in terms of a victim of crime knowing where and how to report, should they be going to action fraud, or should someone who's a victim of a fraud offence today in Hertfordshire, should they just come to the constabulary or go to action fraud? What would be your advice to people?
I mean, I think both of those. If you think you're a victim of fraud in Hertfordshire, if the first number you've got to hand is 101, call Hertfordshire Constabulary, and we will give you advice and refer you on to action fraud if that's appropriate. By the way, the 101 call handling in Hertfordshire, it continues to be outstandingly strong. The abandon rate, 1-2%. So we're getting to 99-98% of calls within under 2 minutes. So give us a little bit of time. We'll answer the phone within 2 minutes, quicker than your doctors will answer the phone. So call us, or indeed, if you've got the number for action fraud, call them. We will get you to the right person.
Okay. Thank you. And people should have confidence that will get filtered and come through. Thank you. A lot of frauds can be prevented. A huge amount of it is preventable. I know the constabulary's got quite a lot of resources focused in terms of education, supporting residents and businesses to try and prevent themselves becoming victims of crime in this space. Can you just take me through that work and the constabulary's kind of offer to communities around fraud prevention?
Well, we invest a lot of time in this because there's some simple things we can all do to stop ourselves becoming the victims of fraud. From simple things like have a good internet security protection on your computer, never send anybody any money, your bank will never ask you for any money, all these things are out there. But we have a dedicated fraud protection officer, we have dedicated cyber protection officers who work with not just victims, but will work with any business in Hertfordshire who wants some bespoke advice. A couple of months ago I was out again in Welwyn Garden City in the shopping centre, giving advice to the businesses there with the team, giving advice to shoppers there with the team around all these types of frauds, because there's a whole range of supports available. So if anyone's out there thinking, I need some support, I'd like some advice, get in touch with us and we've got a team who will help you.
Thank you. And also, on the victim side of things, the Beacon Fraud Hub does some really good work between the services of the Light Commission and the constabulary's teams in supporting victims of crime, helping recover money where possible as well.
Commissioner, and forgive me, I should have said that there have been, on the back of that, there have been this year, so since January, there have been 133 specific sessions laid on for communities, businesses or individuals where we've spoken to nearly 7,000 people, specifically with a view to stopping people becoming a victim of fraud in the first place.
Thank you, that's very good. You touched on the assessment that the City of London Police had done of the constabulary's work, which was very positive. As I said, this is going to be a kind of growing area for inspection. How's the constabulary kind of building on that assessment that it's already got to prepare for for greater focus in its next inspection in this area?
The reason we called the city in was part of that preparation. Yeah. So let's get the national experts in to tell us how we're doing, and they gave us the highest grade that they could give. I'm not complacent about that, but that has given us the impetus to make the decision to say, well, all of our fraud investigations we have referred will now go into a slightly enhanced fraud team, because that team is very capable. We'll continue with the prevention work, and we will continue to, through victim feedback, beacon services, and indeed more peer reviews if it's need, not be complacent around this, because we want to stop everybody becoming, wherever we can, a victim of this horrible crime. You know, we can all relate to this at a human level, can't we? You know, my parents are more elderly now, and I know my mum would say to me in this space that that kind of engagement through community groups, maybe church groups or old people's homes where there might be pockets of vulnerability is really, really important. So I would definitely say to her, she's proud of me being chief constable, I'd definitely say, hi Mum, we've got this. We're on this one.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think people in Hertfordshire should take comfort from the work that is being done here. Thank you. Our next agenda item is Operation Hotspots, and to ask for an update on the first half of this financial year. So this is the work that's being done across the county to put more hours of high visibility patrols into crime and social behaviour hotspots in town centres. How's it gone for the first half of this financial year?
Thank you. So as you say, April through to the end of September, over 16,000 additional patrol hours in our identified hotspots. I'll give you some numbers here. I think these are really important numbers, and I'll base the half-year performance so far against the full-year performance last year, which was really successful and delivered some binary outcomes. So in the first half of this year, we've made 225 arrests in our hotspots against 333 last year. So we're outperforming last year on arrests. We've conducted 393 specific stop and searches in the first 6 months of this year. So we're ahead of last year in relation to that. We did 680. We have used 979 specific ASB, antisocial behaviour interventions, 61% of what we did last year, so ahead of the profile. I'm really pleased with this because it's a symptom of proactive policing and harm reduction. We've seized 46 knives in our hotspots, and I use that word please advisedly because it's knives not on the streets that I use that word, which is 88% of the 52 received last year, so we're being really effective in that space. And we've taken a firearm off the street, which we hadn't done last year. So this works. If it's in the right places, being seen, being visible, preventing crime, and targeting the right people and stopping harm on our streets. If you unpack that some more, there's so much to say on this, I'm conscious of the time. Town by town, we can go down a list and talk about some of the impact. So if you look at one of the key crime types, we're looking to address serious violence, so robbery of personal possessions on the street. There's been a 50% reduction in those hotspots in Hertfordshire in the last 6 months compared to the same 6 months last year. So it came down last year. It's come down by another 50% in those hotspots. In Watford, we saw a huge reduction in personal robbery, 65% reduction in the first 6 months of this year compared to last year. In Broxbourne, we've seen a 16% reduction in violent crime in hotspots. In St Albans, a 20% reduction, a 22% reduction in East Herts, 15% in Dacorum, 12.5% in Hertsmere. So across the county, this tactic is working at reducing serious violence in those hotspot areas.
Thank you. That's really pleasing to hear, and it was hugely successful last year, and so to hear we're getting more of it done by the same point in the year this year is really positive, and I think those figures take us over 40,000 hours of additional patrol since last year in total, which is excellent. How and you touched upon some good examples there of where that has had a really tangible impact on specific issues in towns. which is positive to hear because it's about the purpose of the activity ultimately, isn't it? There's still, from the data that I've seen, quite significant disparities in terms of the number of patrols done in different towns and different districts. How's that being kind of measured and addressed? And I appreciate a lot of it's overtime funded, so relies on officers kind of being available and having the capacity to do it on top of their day-to-day work. But in terms of the districts that are lower, the ones that would stand out would be around Hemel Hempstead, Welwyn Hatfield, for example. What work's been done to try and drive up the number of patrols in those kinds of areas?
We see that data, Commissioner, as you would rightly expect, and we do understand where that disparity is. And sometimes that is, as you say, it's just a capacity issue because Hemel and Welwyn Hatfield tend to be two of our busier districts anyway. So if our reactive requirement or investigative requirement about issues that happen sometimes take away the capacity for teams to either be able to do additional patrols at the end of duties or feel they've got the capacity to come in at additional times to do it. But we're working really carefully with those new enhanced neighbourhood senior management teams and the Chief Inspector running those patches so we can make sure we get more activity where we deem and judge more activity is required.
Thank you. And kind of at the other end of the table, I think St Albans are now topping it, which is really good. Watford's still really strong in terms of those, and there have been some really good success stories, particularly around retail crime in those areas, including officers dealing with crimes in progress, which have had some really positive reactions from businesses as well. So that's positive. In terms of the kind of rest of the financial year, so we're ahead of where we were at the same point last year. Are we on track to be able to maintain that momentum for the rest of the financial year, do you feel?
Yes, we will. We will outperform to an even more pleasing extent last year's performance with this year's performance. And there's a real good overlap here between some of these serious violence hotspots and some of our drive to be in town centres, to be tackling shop theft, to be tackling those kind of antisocial behaviour, community concerns that maybe are just as really important as well, but not serious violence. So there's a fantastic overlap here, and it's been a brilliant way, you alluded to it, for towns and partnerships to come together. So there's been some really successful work in St Albans with recent town centre safety days, where we come together, we're incredibly visible. It's driving more of the policing activity I've talked about, and it's raising awareness and confidence in retailers and local businesses and local residents that we are working together to tackle the issues that belong to them.
Thank you very much. And I think ultimately that presence being visible in the areas that drive the crime hotspots, but also in terms of that public reassurance is really welcome. And I know it's what people across the county want to see the constabulary doing. So a positive update there. Thank you. That brings us to the end of today's agenda. So, Chief Constable, thank you very much for the updates and for the work you and your teams are doing across all of those areas. Thank you to members of the public for watching. I hope you found it a useful session today. And we'll close the recording now.